What if? What if severe weather meant you couldn't open your dialysis or opioid treatment center? How would you communicate to your patients and staff where they can receive treatment? What if a fire in your center forced patients and staff to evacuate? How would you account for their safety and continued care? These are just two examples of emergencies that can affect your center's ability to provide medical services to your patients. New York City and the North Help Coalition are dedicated to helping you ensure the safety and well-being of vulnerable populations with special medical needs in New York City. This video introduces you to the basic principles of emergency planning and response, and how to more effectively manage a disaster that may compromise the way you usually provide care. Addressing emergencies before they occur until after they are over is a process that can be broken into several phases. Each is important for your center to manage an emergency. Prepare and plan for the what if. Develop an emergency operations plan and train staff and patients on your plan. Activate your plan and respond to the emergency. Recover so your center is fully operational again. Review the effectiveness of your response and improve. Revise your emergency operations plan and retrain staff and patients. This is a continuous process with the goal to always improve preparedness and response for the next emergency. Let's start with a review of the basic planning your leadership team should be undertaking. Plans must identify and describe the essential service required by your patients that your center must maintain or coordinate to deliver care. Being prepared for the what if requires you to have an emergency operations plan that serves as your center's roadmap to follow when responding to the unexpected with little or no notice. To help ensure your emergency operations plan is comprehensive enough, ask yourself, what if? This process should assess common hazards that are considered likely or known and would have a significant impact to the facility. What if weather interrupts travel throughout the city, preventing staff or patients from traveling to and from your facility? What if electricity or other critical utilities like water or communications were interrupted? Envisioning potential what-if emergencies that could disrupt your ability to provide necessary patient care will help you identify how to continue when the unexpected occurs. Across each what-if emergency scenario, your emergency operations plan should address the many aspects that enable you to provide patient care, including utilities like power, communications, your center's infrastructure, transportation, staff availability, patient access to your center, and availability of supplies, medications, and food if necessary. Situations and the information available during emergencies change rapidly. Therefore, you, your facility, and your plans must be flexible enough to manage incidents quickly when all information is not yet known.
During an emergency at your dialysis or OTP center, it is likely that staff will need to perform tasks that they do not do routinely. As the emergency or disaster changes, staff will need to adapt. Remember, it is important to train staff on their roles during a disaster and to inform them that their role may change. Managing an emergency effectively requires assembling a response team, known as the Incident Management Team, to lead and coordinate the emergency response. The team's specific roles should be outlined in your emergency operations plan. When an emergency occurs, this team will take specific actions to implement the emergency operations plan and manage the multiple phases of emergency response from beginning to end. Monitoring for emergencies is an important part of the process. Identifying potential emergency events and staying informed is critical to ensure the safety and well-being of your patients. Assign specific staff members to monitor news outlets, as well as notifications and alerts to identify events that may impact your center. They should be taught when, how, and with which key staff and leaders this information should be shared. It is important to register for notifications from the New York City Emergency Management and alerts from Notify NYC. In developing an effective emergency operations plan, you should evaluate what resources and supplies are available and determine if you need to increase your supplies, medication, or food inventory. Knowing what's currently available will guide you in determining the steps you need to take to prepare. In today's world, most everything relies on electricity. The systems we use to communicate day to day and rely on in disasters are dependent on electricity. Now think about another blackout like the one we experienced in 2003. Would your desk phones work? Your email? Your cell phones? The fact of the matter is that these services which you rely on without thinking may fail in a disaster. Other utilities like heat, air conditioning, and water also play crucial roles in serving patients. A disruption in any utility service could impact your ability to provide patient care. It is important to understand the impact of a utility failure on your operations and what backup systems are in place to continue essential services. Ask yourself, do we have a backup if our heating or air conditioning goes out? Do we have a generator? Who would I call if we lose water service? If you answered no or I don't know to any of these, it may be time to review your emergency operations plan.
An important element of preparedness is identifying community planning and response partners. It's useful to develop partnerships in the neighborhood and to educate community neighbors on the services your center provides and what you may require from them during disasters. Ideally, your planning and exercise programs will include your community neighbors. It's important to recognize that if your facility is unable to provide service, or your patients cannot travel to your center during the emergency, you need to have a backup facility identified to provide care to your patients. When identifying backup centers, consider things like services offered, as well as distance from your facility and from the patient's homes. It's a good idea to provide your patients with multiple options. Some emergencies may require you to shelter in place in the facility. This means training staff on when and how to shelter in place. All staff must know where in the building they can safely shelter. For example, does the emergency require staying away from windows and doors? Some emergencies may be long-term. An impending severe weather event like a hurricane or a blizzard may cause travel and transit disruptions. Do you have the plans and capabilities to house staff overnight? What supplies are needed to remain comfortable for an extended time? To address the potential need to shelter in place unexpectedly, all staff should be trained to build and carry a go bag with them when they come to the center. Basic go bag items include a change of clothes, medications, extra cash, other needed essentials needed for surviving 3 days away from home. It's important for staff to develop family emergency plans that prepare their families when emergencies keep them from going home at the end of the day. If staff members are worried about an unprepared family, it makes it difficult to be effective at work. A communications plan is a vital part of any emergency operations plan. Having several options to communicate is critical in being prepared for a range of emergency situations. Your communications plan should include methods of communicating with staff, patients, vendors, community partners, response partners, backup facilities, and regulatory agencies. Having the ability to communicate with your employees is paramount. Employees cannot react properly to emergency if they're not aware of it, and they need to be updated as things change. What if staff needs to be reached quickly? How will you reach them? How will they be informed before, during, and after an emergency? To successfully reach staff, it is important to routinely check and update contact information. Do you have processes for maintaining up-to-date employee contact information, such as home and cell phone numbers, addresses, and email addresses for when usual communication systems fail? Does your center have an emergency call tree, and have you practiced using it? Your communications plan must also include how will you communicate with your patients during an emergency? Not only must you be able to reach them, but they must know how to reach you. How would you contact your scheduled patients to tell them that the center is closed during an emergency? Can you provide callers with automated emergency messages? Do your patients update their contact information regularly? Social media can be powerful and efficient. Can your patients go to a website or follow you on Twitter, Facebook, or use other applications to communicate? These tools can be very valuable for mass communications during an emergency. Your answers to these questions will form the basis of a good communications plan. Keeping all staff and patients informed can prevent them from taking potentially harmful actions, such as traveling to a closed center during severe weather.
Training is the next phase in preparing for handling emergencies. It is important staff are trained in their emergency roles and responsibilities and that checklists are available that provide key emergency response procedures. Remember, training requires dedicated time for learning and practicing procedures. Training can be conducted in a variety of ways, but nothing replaces drills and exercises designed to practice emergency procedures and concepts outlined in your emergency operations plan. Classroom-style training, either in person or online, can be useful when introducing a plan or a new aspect of a plan. Drills should be conducted routinely to practice a process or procedure that is not done frequently to ensure safety. Fire drills are a good example of this. Exercises are another way to learn emergency procedures. A common beneficial exercise for an opioid treatment program or dialysis center to conduct is a tabletop exercise. A tabletop exercise is a scenario-based discussion that simulates an emergency situation. Tabletop exercises are excellent opportunities for testing new and existing plans without affecting the center operations. It is important to also train your patients about what to do if an emergency affects your center. Patients must learn specific procedures to manage their dialysis and opioid treatment during an emergency that may require them to quickly leave the center or limit their ability to get to a center. This includes how to get information about the facility, where backup facilities are, how to access transportation, when to call 911 or go to the emergency room, what medical information they should have handy, and knowing their emergency diet plan for dialysis patients or for opioid treatment program patients, how their medication distribution will be managed. Now that we have discussed basic preparedness, let's review the response strategies you should employ in a disaster.
When an emergency situation occurs at the facility, or when notifications or alerts indicate an emergency exists that may impact your facility, you need to activate your emergency operations plan. At this time, your incident management team, or IMT, is activated to lead your center's emergency response. The team immediately meets to gather available information to understand the event and its real or potential impacts on your operations. The IMT will create an incident action plan, your IAP, to outline activities needed to manage the center during the emergency. The IAP is used as a guide to prioritize and track response and should take into account the uniqueness of the emergency. Let's talk some more about developing your IAP. The IAP must address all aspects that enable you to provide patient care, including assessing utilities like power and communications, your center's infrastructure, transportation, staff availability, patient access to your center, and availability of supplies, medication, and food. Your IAP must outline actions needed to address actual impacts or potential impact, as well as actions needed to reduce the impact. One possible action you may need to take is to modify your services. Do you close your center? Perhaps modify your operating hours. Do you need to reschedule your patients? Does it appear the emergency is so significant that you need to relocate staff and patients to another center? Some other actions for the team to take are: assess availability of staff to get to the center. If they cannot get to their usual center, it may be possible for them to help at another center closer to their home. Determine if there is a need to shelter staff or patients that are already in the center, if it is unsafe to leave or travel. Assign activities to IMT members. The incident management team will also need to activate the communications plan to provide timely information to patients, staff, executives, community partners, vendors, response partners, backup centers, and any other entity who relies on you or whom you rely upon. This should also include changes to social media, website, or hotline messages. Depending on the situation, service changes might also need to be communicated to the regulatory authorities, such as the Department of Health. Dialysis centers might have to notify staff to come in for extra shifts and access necessary equipment and supplies. Notify backup centers of your facility's ongoing needs. Notify patients about changes to their dialysis schedule or other locations to get dialysis, how to get to the centers, and when to activate their emergency diets. OTP centers might need to direct patients to alternate centers or determine if extra doses will be dispensed. The IMT will identify how to determine when the emergency is no longer a threat and determine when the center can begin to recover and when they will be able to continue normal services. Once they have outlined these actions, the IMT will be responsible for implementing the actions and determining the timeline for completion.
The next phase is recover. Recovering will require specific steps in order to return operations back to normal or as close to normal as possible after an emergency while ensuring continued patient care as well as staff and patient safety. The first step in recovery is determining when the emergency has ended, or more specifically, determining when your center is no longer at risk. Once the emergency has ended, a thorough assessment of the facility must be conducted to understand the impact of the emergency and the actions needed to recover. The incident management team will use this information to develop a recovery plan. Similar to the respond and activate phase, the recover phase requires you to address multiple aspects related to caring for your patients, including utilities like power, communications, your center's infrastructure, transportation, staff availability, patient access to your center, and availability of supplies, medication, and food if necessary. For the recovery plan, you must determine what level of services, if any, you can provide now and how you will restore services to normal. Components of the plan might include making necessary repair to the facility if required, scheduling staff and patients, obtaining supplies and medications, etc. Not surprisingly, communications continues to be a critical component for the recovery plan. You will need to continue to keep your staff, patients, vendors, response partners, community partners, backup centers, and regulatory agencies all updated on changes as you start returning to normal operations.
The next phase is review, document, and improve. As part of the continuous process of being prepared for emergencies, it is important to take the time after you have returned to normal operations to review the response, document what occurred, and make changes to the emergency operations plan to be able to respond better in the future. As soon as possible after the recovery stage, facility staff that were involved in the emergency response and recovery should be convened for a debriefing session, often called a hot wash, where information about the strengths and weaknesses of the response is gathered for review. An after-action report, commonly referred to as an AAR, must be written to document the response and recovery, as well as to record strengths to be maintained and built upon and potential areas of improvement. An improvement plan must be developed in order to outline actions needed to ensure a positive outcome in future similar events. Ideally, you will conduct your debrief and write your AAR and IP soon after the event. As a guideline, we suggest you develop an AAR and IP within 30 days of the event. In order to successfully complete your improvement plan actions, you will need to have further meetings designed to track the plan's progress. The improvement plan should assign improvement activities to appropriate stakeholders along with an improvement timeline. Aim to complete the identified improvement actions in your IP within 90 days. This emergency event should be included in your next hazard vulnerability analysis. It is important to understand that being prepared for the what if is a continuous process. Now that you have documented the emergency response and identified improvement opportunities, it is necessary to review your emergency operations plan within the context of the last response. Changes to the emergency operations plan may be needed to ensure future situations can be handled in the most effective way possible. Whenever changes are made to your emergency operations plan, training should follow. You will need to train staff and patients on all relevant changes that affect how they will need to respond in a future emergency. We have provided a broad range of aspects to consider for ensuring care for your patients when what if becomes a reality during emergency situations. Throughout the different phases of managing emergencies, there may be additional aspects to consider or actions you may need to take specific to your center that may vary from emergency to emergency. To ensure the continued safety and well-being of your patients and staff, you need to prepare and plan for the what if, develop an emergency operations plan, and train staff and patients on your plan. Activate your plan and respond to the emergency. Recover so your center is fully operational again, review the effectiveness of your response and improve, revise your emergency operations plan, and retrain staff and patients. While this was not intended to be a total emergency management training program, I hope we were able to help you better understand how to begin your emergency response. Consider this video as the starting point and understand that it should be supplemented by additional training in incident management, which is available free of charge on the FEMA website. For more information, contact your emergency manager or the NYCHealth Coalition.
For a transcript of this presentation or additional training information, please call the NYCHealth Coalition at 212-241-8955.